Kiera's hand trembled, the weight of the laden tray amplifying her anxiety. Before her stood Richard, the restaurant's manager, his face a roadmap of fury, a vein throbbing in his temple as he jabbed a finger at the pristine Italian marble floor. "I told you," he spat, his voice dripping with condescension, "to get on your knees and apologize to Mr. Blackwell." Her gaze flickered to the man seated at the coveted table 7. Thomas Blackwell, a titan of Wall Street, his gray hair meticulously styled, his expensive suit reeking of power, and a cruel smile playing on his lips. He was a predator, and Kiera was his prey. He had orchestrated the scene, deliberately spilling the ruby red wine on his own lap, all to humiliate her. Everyone in the hushed, opulent restaurant knew it, but fear held their tongues. "I won't kneel," Kiera declared, her voice a defiant whisper in the suffocating atmosphere. Despite the frantic drumbeat of her heart, she held her ground. "I didn't do anything wrong." Richard advanced, his shadow looming over her. "Then you're fired," he snarled, "and you'll pay for the wine you wasted. $300. A week's worth of backbreaking work. A week's worth of sacrifices that barely kept her and her ailing mother afloat." That sum represented her sick mother's rent, the roof over their heads in their precarious existence. Kiera felt the sting of tears, but she resolutely blinked them back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Just then, a sound sliced through the tense silence. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that commanded attention, that silenced conversations. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Even Richard, consumed by his petty rage, swiveled his head. A man was striding across the main dining room, a figure of imposing presence. Impeccable black suit, a stark contrast to his subtly undone white shirt, revealing a glimpse of tan skin and a dark, intricate tattoo that snaked up his neck. But it was his eyes that truly captivated and intimidated. Black, piercing, they seemed to bore straight through pretense and into the soul. Matteo Ricci. The name resonated through the room, like a whispered legend. Everyone in New York knew that name, associated with power, wealth, and a darkness that clung to him like a shadow. Even Kiera, who barely had time to catch the news between her relentless 3 jobs, recognized the name, a shiver tracing its path down her spine. He stopped a mere 6 feet from her, an uncrossable boundary. His bodyguards materialized, flanking the exits, effectively sealing the room. "Repeat what you just said," Matteo commanded, his gaze fixed on Richard, unwavering. His voice was a low, silken caress, yet laced with an undercurrent of absolute, terrifying power. If you want to find out what happened in that restaurant, the seismic shift that occurred that night, and how Kiera's life was irrevocably altered, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment stating where you're watching from. Every view helps bring more intense stories like this one to you. Kiera Davis awoke at precisely 4:30 a.m., a ritual she had performed every day for the past 3 years. A relentless cycle driven by necessity. The cramped apartment in the Bronx was frigid, the ancient radiator offering little respite from the biting cold. She pulled her worn coat over her pajamas, a shield against the chill, and tiptoed into her mother's room to check her medication. Eleanor Davis slept fitfully, her breathing labored and ragged, a constant reminder of the pneumonia that had stubbornly refused to release its grip. Kiera scribbled a quick note on the nightstand. "Had breakfast, Mom. Back at 11 o'clock. Love you." A lie, a small act of kindness born from desperation. She didn't have time for breakfast. And she wouldn't be back until 3 p.m., not 11 a.m. But Eleanor worried too much. Her first shift commenced with cleaning offices in Manhattan, a grueling 4-hour stint from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m., scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. Then, a frantic dash to her second job, cashier at a bustling supermarket, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., scanning groceries and enduring the endless stream of customers. It was her third job, the one she both dreaded and relied on, that paid the best, a fragile lifeline in her precarious existence. Waitress at Ristorante Paradiso, one of the most exclusive and exorbitantly priced Italian restaurants in New York, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., sometimes stretching to midnight, serving the city's elite. Kiera gazed at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, her face etched with fatigue as she wrestled her unruly curly hair into a tight, unforgiving bun. 24 years old, a business administration graduate from a community college that no one had ever heard of. Resumes meticulously crafted and dispatched to hundreds of companies. 0 responses. "You're overqualified," they said, a veiled euphemism that translated to, "You don't have the right connections, the pedigree we seek." So, she cleaned, rang up groceries, served food, and diligently paid her mother's mounting bills. That evening, Kiera arrived at Paradiso at 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before her scheduled shift, a testament to her unwavering punctuality. As always, Richard, the manager, subjected her to a disdainful once-over, his eyes lingering on her uniform with thinly veiled disapproval. "Your uniform is wrinkled," he commented, his voice laced with criticism. "I just ironed it," she retorted calmly, her voice devoid of emotion. A small act of defiance. True, she had ironed it hastily in the supermarket staff room, the ancient appliance barely functioning. "You're working table 7 today," Richard continued, his gaze hardening. "And Kiera." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of stale coffee and cheap cigarettes, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "Mr. Blackwell is there. He's a VIP client. Don't mess anything up." Thomas Blackwell, CEO of some obscenely profitable investment company, graced the restaurant with his presence twice a month, and invariably treated the staff with utter disdain, his arrogance palpable. Kiera nodded, swallowing her rising resentment, and made her way to table 7. Blackwell was seated with 3 other men, all clad in impeccably tailored suits, all white, all wealthy, all exuding that unmistakable air of superiority that invariably made her stomach churn. "Good evening, gentlemen," Kiera greeted, forcing a smile. "My name is Kiera, and I'll be serving you tonight. Can I start with something to drink?" Blackwell didn't even acknowledge her presence, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Red wine, the Beau 2015. Excellent choice, sir," Kiera replied, masking her irritation. She returned with the bottle, presenting the label as protocol dictated. Blackwell waved dismissively, his impatience evident. Kiera poured a small amount into his glass for tasting. He took a sip, contorting his face into an exaggerated grimace. "It's warm," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "Don't you know how to serve wine properly?" The wine is at the correct temperature, sir. 18 degrees Celsius. Don't contradict me, Blackwell snapped, his eyes narrowing. He seized the glass and deliberately upended it, pouring the crimson liquid onto his own lap. Look what you did. The entire restaurant seemed to collectively gasp, all eyes turning towards the unfolding drama. Kiera froze, her mind reeling. I didn't. You spilled wine on me, Blackwell accused, rising to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. An $800 bottle. Richard materialized instantly, his expression a mixture of concern and barely concealed panic. What happened here? Your incompetent employee spilled wine on me, Blackwell asserted, his voice booming. I demand that she apologize. On her knees. Kiera's heart hammered against her ribs. Mr. Blackwell, I sincerely apologize. On your knees, he repeated, pointing at the floor, his voice cold and unwavering. Richard shot Kiera a pleading look. Do what he's asking. I won't. Then you're fired, Richard spat, his face contorted with rage, and you'll pay for the bottle. That's when she heard the footsteps. Matteo Ricci entered through the main door like a silent storm, radiating an aura of danger that permeated the room. Two imposing bodyguards flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with predatory focus. The maitre d' practically sprinted to intercept him, but Matteo brushed past him, his attention solely focused on Kiera, or rather, on the man demanding she kneel. Matteo traversed the restaurant, each step deepening the oppressive silence. He stopped between Kiera and Blackwell, his broad back forming an impassable barrier. Repeat what you just said, Matteo commanded, his voice a low, menacing growl that sent a shiver down Kiera's spine. Blackwell paled, his bravado evaporating. Mr. Ricci, I didn't know you were. You told her to kneel. It was a misunderstanding. Answer the question. Blackwell swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. She spilled wine on me. Matteo turned his head slightly, his dark, intense eyes locking onto Kiera for the first time, seeming to penetrate her very soul. Is that true? Kiera found her voice, a fragile thread of defiance in the suffocating atmosphere. No, sir. He spilled it deliberately. Matteo's gaze returned to Blackwell, his expression hardening. So, you lied. And you demanded that an employee humiliate herself because of your lie. I'm an important client. You're nothing. Matteo shrugged off his suit jacket, revealing suspenders over his crisp white shirt. He folded the jacket with deliberate care and draped it over Kiera's shoulders. She looked at him, stunned. The jacket was warm, heavy, imbued with a subtle scent of expensive cologne and raw masculinity. No one, Matteo declared, his voice resonating with cold fury, still fixed on Blackwell, is going to make you kneel while I'm breathing. The restaurant was utterly silent, every eye glued to the unfolding scene. Kiera felt the weight of Matteo's jacket on her shoulders, as if it were forged from lead or gold, something precious and undeniably dangerous. Thomas Blackwell seemed to have forgotten how to speak, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Mr. Ricci, with all due respect. And you don't have my respect, Matteo interrupted, his voice cutting like a knife. And you never will. Get out of my restaurant. Your restaurant? Richard stammered, his face a kaleidoscope of fear and confusion. Sir, I didn't know you were the... Now you know. Matteo turned to him, his expression glacial. You refired too. Effective immediately. But I've worked here for 15 years. Richard protested, his voice laced with desperation. And in 15 years, you didn't learn to treat people with dignity. Matteo made an almost imperceptible gesture. Two bodyguards materialized beside Richard, their presence radiating menace. Collect your things, both of you. Blackwell attempted one last gambit. You can't. I can do whatever I want. Matteo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I've owned this restaurant for 3 years. You just never saw me here because I don't need to prove anything to men like you. But if you do anything to hurt this young woman, if she loses any job, if any door closes for her because of this, I'll consider it a personal insult. And you don't want to insult me personally. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, delivered with chilling certainty. Blackwell stumbled out, his face a mask of humiliation. Richard followed him, his career imploding before his very eyes. The entire restaurant erupted in a cacophony of whispers, the tension finally breaking. Kiera remained frozen in place, the jacket still draped over her shoulders, a tangible symbol of the extraordinary events that had just transpired. She knew she should say something, thank him, anything. But her voice had deserted her, lost in the whirlwind of emotions. Matteo finally turned his attention to her. Up close, he was even more imposing, a force of nature. Easily 6'1", broad shoulders, a strong jaw partially obscured by a meticulously trimmed beard. The tattoo on his neck, a coiled snake, was intricate and undeniably artistic. What's your name? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Kiera, she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Kiera Davis. Kiera. The way he said her name sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine, a strange flutter in her stomach. Are you okay? Yes. Thank you. You didn't have to. I did. He extended his hand, not to shake hers, but to retrieve his jacket. Kiera quickly removed the jacket, suddenly self-conscious. Of course, he was just making a statement, asserting his dominance. But instead of putting on the jacket, Matteo folded it over his arm, his eyes unwavering. How long have you worked here? 8 months. Do you like the work? A strange question, considering the circumstances. I need the work, she said honestly, her voice devoid of pretense. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or something deeper. Marco, Matteo called out. One of the bodyguards approached, his movements fluid and silent. Kiera will assume temporary management until we find someone permanent. Kiera blinked, her mind struggling to process the information. What? You've worked here for 8 months. You know how things work. You know how to treat people with respect. Matteo looked at her, his gaze intense. Unless you don't want to. I don't have management experience. You have something better. Character. He paused, his eyes assessing her. How much was Richard paying you? $15 an hour plus tips. Now it's $40 an hour. No tips because you won't be serving tables anymore. You'll be managing. Matteo handed her a card, black with gold lettering. Call this number tomorrow. My assistant will arrange the paperwork. Kiera stared at the card, her hands trembling. $40 an hour. That meant she could finally quit her other 2 jobs, could sleep more than 4 hours a night, could afford a better doctor for her mother, a glimmer of hope in her bleak existence. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice breaking, the weight of his generosity overwhelming her. Matteo studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because someone did this for me once, when I had nothing. He paused, his gaze softening slightly. And because you didn't kneel, even when it would have been easier. He started to turn, but Kiera grabbed his arm instinctively, a desperate act of gratitude. Mistake. Both bodyguards reacted instantly, their hands moving towards their weapons. Matteo raised his hand, stopping them, his gaze fixed on Kiera. Kiera released his arm as if it had burned her face flushed with embarrassment. Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. What did you want to say? Thank you. Seriously, you changed my life today. Matteo looked at her, and for the first time, something that looked almost like a smile touched his lips, transforming his face. You're welcome, Kiera Davis. 3 weeks later, Kiera was slowly beginning to believe that the night at Paradiso had actually happened, that it wasn't just a bizarre dream. The job as manager was challenging, demanding, but she loved every second of it. Coordinating staff, resolving conflicts, creating schedules, it all made sense to her, as if she had been preparing for this her entire life. She was finally utilizing her degree, the piece of paper that had seemed so worthless, and for the first time in 3 years, she slept through an entire night, her body finally able to rest. Her mother wept when Kiera told her about the raise, her eyes filled with gratitude. God bless you, baby, she sobbed, and bless that man who helped you. Kiera deliberately omitted the details of who Matteo Ricci was, what his name truly meant. Eleanor didn't need to know that her daughter now worked for the Mafia, even though it was blindingly obvious what Matteo was, what world he inhabited. Everyone knew. The politicians who frequented the restaurant and lowered their voices when he approached. The police officers who conveniently disappeared when he was present. The way powerful people treated Matteo, with a mixture of fear and deference. Kiera tried not to dwell on it, compartmentalizing that part of her life. He gave her a chance when no one else would, a lifeline in her desperate circumstances. Matteo didn't return to the restaurant for 3 weeks. Kiera half expected him to show up to supervise, to ensure she was performing adequately, but his office simply sent a message. Mr. Ricci trusts your judgment. Keep up the good work. Then in the 4th week he appeared. It was a Tuesday evening, relatively quiet compared to the weekend rush. Kiera was reviewing supplier orders in the cramped office when she heard a commotion outside, a shift in the atmosphere. She emerged from the office and saw Matteo being escorted to the private table in the back, his presence radiating an unmistakable aura of power. 3 men accompanied him, all exuding an air of danger, their eyes cold and assessing. The chef came running, his face flushed with excitement and a hint of trepidation. Kiera, Mr. Ricci is here. What do? We treat him like any client, she replied calmly, masking her own nervousness. With excellence. Kiera grabbed the special menu and approached the private table, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knocked lightly on the door before entering. The 4 men looked up, their gazes scrutinizing. Matteo was seated with his back to the wall, a subtle but deliberate display of power. Good evening, gentlemen. Kiera greeted, forcing a smile. Welcome to Paradiso. Matteo recognized her immediately, his eyes widening slightly. Something flickered in his gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction. Kiera, he said, his voice resonating with a warmth that made her heart flutter. The sound of her name on his lips still had an inexplicable effect on her. You're managing well. Thank you, sir, she replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. Can I bring you something to drink? Champagne. The krug that I know you hide for special occasions. She blinked, her surprise evident. How did he know that? Of course. Certainly, sir. She smiled, recovering quickly. And for dinner, would you allow me to choose something? I would recommend a tasting menu. The other men at the table exchanged curious glances. Apparently, Matteo didn't usually relinquish control, didn't usually let other people choose for him. Kiera nodded and left, her mind racing. She meticulously assembled a perfect tasting menu, 7 courses, each one showcasing the chef's finest creations, a culinary journey. When she brought the first course, burrata with heirloom tomatoes and basil, Matteo stopped her, his eyes fixed on her. Seat. Sir, sit with us. I want your opinion on something. The other men exchanged surprised glances, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. I don't think it's appropriate, one of them murmured. I just made it appropriate. Matteo pulled out a chair, his gaze unwavering. Please. Kiera sat down, feeling acutely uncomfortable under the intense scrutiny of the 3 men. They studied her with undisguised curiosity, their eyes assessing her as if she were some exotic specimen. Kiera, Matteo began, his voice cutting through the tension. You studied business administration, right? How did he know that? She had never mentioned it to him. Yes. At community college. Yes. And you grew up here in New York? Yes. In the Bronx? Yes. Matteo nodded, as if that confirmed something he already knew. I'm opening a new restaurant in a revitalizing neighborhood. I want it to be accessible to the local community, but profitable enough to sustain itself. How would you do that? Kiera looked at him, her mind racing. Was this a test? A subtle evaluation of her skills? I would create an affordable fixed-price menu on weekdays when traffic is lower, offer higher local partnerships with farms to reduce costs, and offer training programs for young people from the community who want to work in gastronomy. Matteo's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Continue. People want to feel welcome. They don't want charity. They want quality. If you create a space that respects the community will respect you back. Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Then, Matteo smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that completely transformed his face, softening his features and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior. You just described exactly what I wanted to do, but didn't know how to articulate. He looked at the other men, his gaze unwavering. She stays. One of the men, older, with graying hair, frowned, his disapproval evident. Matteo, do you trust her? With my life, Matteo said simply, his voice resonating with unwavering conviction. The words hit Kiera like a punch to the stomach, stealing her breath. He barely knew her. Why would he say that? After that night, Everything shifted once again, subtly but undeniably. Mateo started showing up at Paradiso 3 4 times a week, his presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. He always asked Kiera to sit with him, to discuss ideas for the new restaurant, sometimes alone, sometimes with his associates, drawing her into his world. Kiera tried to maintain professionalism, to keep their relationship strictly business, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the details, the subtle nuances. The way Mateo always sought her opinion before making decisions, how he listened, really listened, when she spoke, his gaze intent, the way his eyes softened when she mentioned her mother, and the fierce protectiveness he exhibited towards her. One night, a drunk customer, emboldened by alcohol and a sense of entitlement, made a crude, racist comment. Before Kiera could even formulate a response, Mateo appeared out of nowhere, grabbed the man by the collar, and dragged him outside, his movements swift and decisive. "Never set foot here again," Kiera heard him say on the sidewalk, his voice a low, menacing growl. "And if I hear that you treated any employee like that anywhere, I'll find you." Kiera should have been uncomfortable with the implied violence, the raw display of power, but instead she felt a surge of warmth, a sense of being protected. A dangerous thought, she knew, but one she couldn't suppress. 6 weeks after that fateful night at Paradiso, Mateo summoned her to his office, a sprawling space that exuded wealth and power. The walls were adorned with artwork, and the panoramic windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. "The new restaurant opens in 2 months," he said, his voice calm and assured, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon, the amber liquid shimmering in the light. "I want you to manage it. Mateo, I 60,000 a year plus profit sharing and flexible hours because I know you take care of your mother." 60,000. Kiera had earned 19,000 the previous year, a stark contrast that left her speechless. "You barely know me," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Mateo stood up, walked around the massive desk, and sat on the edge, directly in front of her, his presence both intimidating and strangely comforting. "I know you well enough." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met, that you're fiercely loyal, that you have a natural talent for leadership, and I know you never ask anything from anyone, even when you should. You don't know that. How long has your mother been sick?" Kiera froze, her breath catching in her throat. "How did you? 3 years? A chronic pneumonia that turned into pulmonary fibrosis. You spend $1,200 a month on medication. You've worked 3 jobs for 2 years. Never took a vacation. Never bought anything for yourself." Mateo leaned closer, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "You think I give $60,000 opportunities without doing my homework?" Kiera should have been furious, outraged that he had invaded her privacy, investigated her life without her permission. But all she could feel was seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life, her struggles acknowledged. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice breaking, the question hanging in the air. Mateo reached out, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gently touched her cheek with his knuckles, his touch surprisingly tender. "Because I see you, Kiera, and you deserve more than the world has given you so far." His touch was warm, calloused, and surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver down her spine. Kiera closed her eyes, succumbing to the moment. She shouldn't want this. He was dangerous. She knew what he was, what his world entailed. But God, she was so tired of being strong alone, of carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Accept the position," Mateo said softly, his voice a caress against her skin. "Let me help you." "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. When she opened her eyes, Mateo was smiling, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. The new restaurant, Chris and Casa, opened 8 weeks later, a testament to their combined vision and relentless effort. Kiera worked 16 hours a day in the final 2 weeks before the opening, hiring staff, overseeing training, meticulously setting up the space, ensuring every detail was perfect. Mateo was by her side the whole time, a constant source of support, moving furniture, painting walls, laughing when she corrected his methods. "You're bossy," he said one evening when she reorganized the tables for the 3rd time, her perfectionism driving her. "You hired me to manage," she retorted, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "So, let me manage." "Yes, Mom," he smiled, that smile that made her heart skip a beat, a smile that held a promise of something more. Opening night was an absolute success, a vibrant celebration of community and culinary excellence. The local residents showed up in force, families, young people, elderly, all amazed by the incredible food at affordable prices, the realization of their shared vision. Kiera was manning the register when she saw a group of men enter, their presence immediately unsettling. They weren't from the neighborhood, their expensive suits and hard eyes marking them as outsiders. Rivals, she realized with a chill, recognizing the danger instinctively. One of them approached the counter, his gaze sweeping over the restaurant with a predatory air. "Where's Raichi?" "Mr. Raichi isn't here today." Kiera lied smoothly, her voice betraying none of her fear. Mateo was in the back, overseeing the kitchen operations. "Then I'll talk to you." The man leaned over the counter, invading her personal space, his voice low and menacing. "Tell your boss he's operating in our territory. He has 1 week to close." "Or what?" Mateo's voice cut through the air like a blade, silencing the man and drawing everyone's attention. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, his expression a mask of cold fury. 2 bodyguards materialized out of nowhere, their presence radiating menace. The man straightened up, his bravado faltering slightly. "Russo didn't like that you opened here without permission." "I don't need Russo's permission." Mateo walked slowly towards the counter, his every step radiating power, until he stood between Kiera and the man, his body a shield. "And you're going to leave my restaurant now. This is war." "No, it's a warning." Mateo's voice was deceptively calm, but his eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. "If you or anyone from Russo comes back here, if you threaten my staff again, especially her," Mateo pointed at Kiera without taking his eyes off the man, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It won't be war. It'll be a massacre." The entire restaurant was silent, the celebratory atmosphere shattered. Frightened customers, frozen staff, all caught in the crossfire of a brewing conflict. The man looked at Kiera, then back at Mateo, then finally turned and left, his face a mask of resentment. Mateo immediately turned his attention to Kiera, his expression softening with concern. Are you okay? I am, but Mateo, this is going to bring trouble.
Let me worry about that.
He reached out and touched her shoulder, his touch reassuring. No one's going to hurt you. I promise. But he couldn't promise that, she knew. And Kiera was beginning to realize that it wasn't just about protection anymore, about gratitude or obligation. It was about something much more dangerous, something she had desperately tried to ignore. She was falling in love with Mateo Ricci, a man whose world was fraught with danger and violence. 3 days later, someone threw a brick through Casa's window, shattering the glass and sending shards flying across the floor. Miraculously, no one was hurt. The restaurant was closed for the night, but the message was clear, a chilling reminder of the consequences of crossing the wrong people. Mateo showed up within 15 minutes, his presence radiating an anger that was barely contained. Kiera was sweeping up the glass shards when he entered like a hurricane, his eyes searching her for injuries. Are you hurt? I wasn't here. I got the call from the security system. He pulled her into a hug so fast, she didn't have time to think, his arms wrapping around her with fierce protectiveness. Strong arms, the familiar scent of wood and spices clinging to his clothes, his heart beating too fast against her chest. Thank God, he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with relief. Kiera allowed herself to sink into him for 5 precious seconds, savoring the moment of connection, then pulled away, her face flushed. Mateo, maybe you should close the restaurant, just until.
No.
He held her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his gaze, his eyes intense. I won't let them scare you. I won't let them take this from you.
This isn't about me. It's all about you.
The words exploded from him, raw and unfiltered. You think I opened this place for what? Philanthropy? I opened it because you said the community deserved it, because you looked at me with those eyes and talked about giving opportunities, and I realized I wanted to build something that would make you proud. Kiera stared at him, shocked, her mind reeling from his confession. Mateo, I can't do this, he said suddenly, releasing her and stepping back, his eyes filled with conflict. I can't involve you in my life. It's selfish. Involve me in what? You gave me a job, a life. You know it's more than that. He turned away, his expression dark and intense. You know what I feel. Her heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't say it. Why not? Because you feel it too, and it scares you. Because you're dangerous. Because people throw bricks at restaurants because of you. Because you're. She couldn't finish the sentence, the words caught in her throat. Say it. Mateo took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. Because I'm in a mafia. Because my hands aren't clean.
Yes.
The word came out like a scream, a desperate plea. You're good to me, Mateo. Better than anyone ever was. But I can't. I have a mother to take care of. I can't get involved in. You think I'd put you in danger? His voice was low, hurt, his eyes pleading. You really think I'd let anything happen to you? You can't control everything. I can try. He was right in front of her now, so close she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes, the intensity of his emotions reflected in their depths. And I'll try for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. Mateo. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, a tender caress. It was desperate, hungry, a consuming need. Years of loneliness, of suppressed emotions, poured into a single moment of explosive passion. Hands tangled in her hair, his body pressing hers against the wall, ragged breathing, the frantic drumbeat of their hearts. Kiera knew she should push him away, should say no, should end this before it consumed them both. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, surrendering to the moment. The kiss deepened, exploring hands, racing hearts, the whole world disappearing except for the two of them and this impossible, undeniable connection. When they finally separated, both were trembling, breathless, and shaken to their core. You don't understand, Kiera whispered against his lips, her voice filled with fear and longing. I can't lose you. And in your world, people lose people every day. Then I'll change my world. Mateo rested his forehead against hers, his voice a low murmur. For you, Kiera, I'd change everything. You can't. His phone rang, shattering the fragile spell. He cursed under his breath, his body tensing as he looked at the screen. I need to take this. He stepped back, his expression shifting, becoming more guarded. Go. He left, speaking in hushed tones in rapid Italian, his words unintelligible. Kiera leaned against the wall, her fingers touching her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, the lingering warmth of his touch. What had she done? What had she unleashed? Mateo came back 5 minutes later, his face different, harder, more dangerous. I need to go handle something, he said, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. But Kiera. He reached out and cupped her hand in his eyes searching hers. When I get back, we need to talk about us, about the future. Mateo, please, give me a chance to explain everything, the whole truth. He kissed her knuckles, his touch a silent promise. Promise you'll wait. She knew she should say no, should end this now, before it spiraled out of control. But she couldn't. I promise. Mateo didn't come back that night, nor the next. Kiera tried not to worry, tried to convince herself that he was simply occupied with his affairs, that everything was all right. He was a busy man, a dangerous man, and his life was inherently unpredictable. On the 3rd day, she was closing Casa for the night when her phone rang, shattering the silence. Unknown number. Hello, Kiera Davis? A woman's voice, professional and detached. Yes, speaking. You need to come to St. Luke's Hospital. Mateo Ricci is asking for you. The world stopped. Her heart lurched in her chest, a wave of icy dread washing over her. Is he? He's alive, but he was shot. You should come now. Kiera caught the first taxi she saw, her body numb with shock. Her hands were shaking so violently, she could barely dial her mother's number. Mom, I'm going to be late. Don't wait up. Is everything okay, baby? Yes, Mom. I love you. She hung up, tears streaming down her face. Nothing was okay. The hospital was teeming with men in suits, their faces grim and unreadable. Mateo's bodyguards. They recognized her instantly, their eyes acknowledging her presence with a silent nod. They parted, creating a path for her, leading her towards an unknown fate. Immediately, she was waved through. A doctor had found her. Are you Kiera?
Yes. How is he?
She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Stable. The bullet passed clean through his shoulder. Missed anything vital, thankfully, but he's lost a considerable amount of blood. The doctor hesitated, his expression softening. He woke up briefly, just for a few minutes, and the first thing he said was your name. Kiera felt tears welling up, a burning sensation behind her eyes. Can I see him, please? Room 304. Kiera didn't wait for further instructions. She ran, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She burst into room 304 to find Mateo lying in the sterile hospital bed. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the harsh fluorescent light. Tubes snaked from his arms, monitors beeped rhythmically, and a thick bandage was plastered to his left shoulder. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, a weak but undeniably genuine smile touched his lips. Hi you idiot, he rasped, his voice hoarse. Kiera couldn't help herself. She gently, yet firmly, hit his good side, tears now streaming freely down her face. You almost died. You scared me half to death. He weakly grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly firm despite his weakened state. But I didn't. Because I promised you I'd come back. Kiera's breath hitched. It was now, or never. Mateo, marry me. He blinked, seemingly caught off guard.
What?
Marry me, Kiera, he repeated, his voice weak but unwavering. I know it's insane. I know you deserve someone better. But I almost died. And the only thing I could think about was that I wasted 3 precious days without telling you I love you. Every single second of those 3 days was a waste, and it can't be gotten back. You're medicated, she countered, trying to inject a note of reason into the chaos. You're not thinking straight. I'm lucid, he insisted, squeezing her hand tighter. I love you, Kiera. I've loved you since the moment you refused to kneel before me. I loved you when you sat at my table, radiating passion as you talked about your community and your dreams. I've loved you every second since then. With a visible effort, he reached into his hospital gown pocket and pulled out something small. A ring. Simple, yet breathtakingly beautiful. A single, elegant diamond sparkled in the dim light. Say yes, Kiera. Please. Kiera looked at the ring, then into the depths of Mateo's eyes, and finally at the impossible future he was offering. A future filled with both love and danger, intertwined and inseparable. You could die at any moment, she whispered, stating the obvious. Anyone can, he countered, his gaze intense. At least I die knowing I truly lived. With you. Your life is dangerous, Mateo. I'm not sure I can live with that kind of fear. I'd change that for you, Kiera. I swear I would. I'd get out. I'd leave it all behind. She searched his eyes, seeking the truth. You'd leave the Mafia? He smiled, a flicker of his old self. Okay, I can't get out completely. It doesn't work that way. But I can step back, open legitimate businesses, live a more normal life. He reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I can give you security, Kiera. Your mother would have the best doctors, the most advanced treatments. You'd never have to worry about money again, and I'd spend every single day proving that I deserve you. I don't want your money, Mateo. I want you. I know, he said softly. And I know you want to see me alive at the end of every day, and I promise to try. I promise to do everything in my power to come home to you. He smiled sadly. It's the best I can offer, Kiera. Kiera closed her eyes, her mind reeling. This was insane. Impossible. Wrong on so many levels. But beneath the fear, the doubt, and the uncertainty, one truth remained, undeniable and unwavering. She loved him. God, she loved him so much it hurt. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding happened 3 months later. Small, intimate, and surprisingly beautiful. It was held in a historic chapel just outside the city. The guest list included only Mateo's closest family, which, unsurprisingly, meant half a dozen men who looked like they could kill with their bare hands, and Elenina Davis, who cried tears of unadulterated joy from beginning to end. My baby is marrying a prince, she whispered to Kiera while carefully adjusting the simple veil that cascaded over her hair. Kiera didn't correct her. Eleanor didn't need to know that Mateo was more godfather than prince. But when Kiera entered that small chapel, her heart skipped a beat. There he was, Mateo, waiting for her at the altar. He was dressed in an impeccable gray suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. His eyes shone with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, and he wore a smile that was only for her, a smile that reached the very depths of her soul. Nothing else mattered in that moment. He extended his hand, his fingers outstretched. She took it without hesitation, her own hand trembling slightly. You're beautiful, he whispered when she reached his side, his voice thick with emotion. You're alive, she whispered back, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. He laughed softly, the sound filling her with warmth. And then, surrounded by love, danger, and the weight of their intertwined destinies, they got married. The first weeks of marriage were, without a doubt, perfect. Mateo bought a penthouse overlooking Central Park. It wasn't an ostentatious mansion, dripping with gold and extravagance. Instead, it was elegant, modern, but above all, welcoming. He gave Kiera free rein to decorate it completely. I want it to feel like a home, Kiera, he said, not a museum. Elenina moved into an apartment in the same building, just 2 floors down. With Mateo's resources, she had access to private doctors and experimental treatments. For the first time in years, her health was improving, a testament to Mateo's unwavering love for Kiera. Kiera continued managing Casa, pouring her heart and soul into the restaurant and the community it served. Meanwhile, Mateo kept his promise. He gradually stepped back from the more dangerous operations, focusing instead on legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, investments. But danger, as they both knew, never completely disappears. It lurked in the shadows, a constant threat that they had to learn to live with. One night, 6 months after the wedding, Kiera was working late at Casa, poring over invoices and spreadsheets. The restaurant was quiet, the last of the staff having left hours ago. Suddenly, she heard the back door creak open. Her head snapped up, her senses on high alert. 3 men entered. Unfamiliar faces, hard eyes, and the unmistakable glint of visible weapons. Where's your husband? One of them demanded, his voice low and menacing. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. Years of poverty had taught her the art of hiding her fear. I don't know, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He doesn't tell me about his business. Liar. Another man spat. Their leader, a hulking figure with a scar that bisected his left cheek, advanced towards her. You're his weakness. Everyone knows that. That makes you a prime target. You were foolish coming here. Kiera's mind raced, but she managed to maintain her terrifying calm. Then you made a mistake coming here. Because when Mateo finds out you touched me, it won't matter where you hide. He will hunt you down, and he will make you pay. The man laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. He won't find out if you're dead, will he? He raised his gun, the barrel aimed directly at her heart. Just then, the front door exploded inward, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Mateo stormed in like a demon unleashed, his eyes blazing with fury. 2 of his most trusted bodyguards, both armed to the teeth, flanked him, their faces grim. Let her go now, Mateo snarled, his voice a low growl that promised unspeakable violence. The leader, momentarily stunned by the sudden entrance, quickly recovered and turned the gun towards Mateo instead of Kiera. Take one more step and I'll shoot. Then shoot me, Mateo replied, his voice unwavering. He kept walking, his eyes locked on the man holding the gun. But not her. Never her. Mateo, don't. Kiera screamed, her voice raw with terror. Everything happened in a blur of chaotic motion. The man fired. Mateo dodged with surprising speed, the bullet whizzing past his ear. His bodyguards reacted instantly, returning fire. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. The invaders crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Kiera screamed, her body shaking uncontrollably. Mateo ran to her, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight. Are you okay? Are you hurt? He asked, his voice filled with desperate concern. No, I'm fine, she stammered, burying her face in his chest. You could have died. You scared me so badly. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Kiera, listen to me. This can't continue. I can't keep putting you in danger like this. Then what do we do, Mateo? What choice do we have? We end this once and for all, he said, his voice resolute. We cut it all off and end it all. The next few days were a whirlwind of hushed conversations and clandestine meetings. Kiera knew that Mateo was planning something big, something that could change their lives forever. She overheard snippets of phone calls, saw the tension etched on his face, and felt the weight of his worries pressing down on them both. Finally, Mateo announced that he was calling a meeting with all the bosses of the 5 families. It was an unprecedented move, a gamble that could either secure their future or destroy everything they had built. Kiera wasn't invited to the meeting, but she spent the entire night pacing the floor of their penthouse, consumed by worry and imagining 1,000 terrible scenarios. She jumped at every sound, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Mateo returned at 4 a.m., exhausted but unharmed. He collapsed onto the couch, his body heavy with fatigue. It's done, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I negotiated peace. Everyone agreed to leave you out of it. If anyone ever touches you, all the families will go against them. How did you manage that, Mateo? What did you offer them? He pulled her onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her protectively. I offered them something they wanted. And I made it perfectly clear that I would burn New York City to the ground before I let anything happen to you. Kiera reached out and touched his face, tracing the lines of exhaustion and tension etched around his eyes. You're really getting out, aren't you, Mateo? Yes, he said, his voice firm. He kissed the palm of her hand, his gaze unwavering. Over the next 6 months, I'll transfer everything. Legitimate businesses, legal structures. He hesitated for a moment, then continued. I was thinking maybe we could move, Kiera. Maybe to California, or Europe somewhere far away from all this. And your mother, of course. She comes with us. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. Kiera, I want to give you a normal life. As normal as possible anyway. She studied him, searching for any sign of regret or hesitation. Would you be happy away from all this, Mateo? Away from everything you've ever known? I'd be happy waking up beside you every day, Kiera, he said simply. The rest is negotiable. Kiera leaned in and kissed him, a long, deep kiss filled with promises of love, loyalty, and a shared future. When they finally separated, she whispered, Then let's start over, Mateo. You, me, and the life we choose together. He nodded, his eyes shining with love and determination. Always. 3 years later, Kiera was sitting in the sun-drenched garden of their house in Napa Valley, California, watching Mateo teach their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, to walk. That's it, Principessa. One more step. Mateo coaxed, his voice filled with love and encouragement. Sophia giggled, her tiny legs wobbling as she stumbled forward, finally collapsing into her father's waiting arms. Eleanor was sitting next to Kiera, her face beaming with pride. For the first time in 5 years, she was breathing without the aid of an oxygen tank, her lungs strengthened by the clean California air and the advanced medical care she was receiving. You chose well, baby, Eleanor said softly, her eyes filled with affection. Kiera smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. I know, Mama. I know. Mateo looked up, caught her gaze, and smiled. It was that same smile that she had fallen in love with all those years ago, a smile that was only for her, a smile that spoke of love, devotion, and a future filled with endless possibilities. He had kept every promise he had ever made to her. He had left the Mafia, opened a successful winery and 3 thriving restaurants, and built a quiet, almost normal life for them and their daughter. Almost. Because some days, Kiera still saw the shadow in his eyes, the lingering tension when the phone rang, the way he still checked the doors twice before going to sleep. Some pasts, she knew, never completely disappeared. But they had built something new, something real, something that was stronger than fear and more powerful than the past. Come here, Kiera, Mateo called, extending a hand to her. Kiera stood up, crossed the lush green lawn, and went into his arms, Sophia hugging her legs tightly. Mama, Sophia cooed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Hi, my love, Kiera whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Mateo kissed the top of Kiera's head, his arms wrapped tightly around her. Happy? She looked at him, at their daughter, at her mother smiling contentedly in the garden, at the beautiful house they had built together, and knew that she was more than happy. She was complete. And it was true. She had started as a struggling waitress who refused to kneel and ended as a woman who had chosen her own destiny with a man who loved her enough to change his own. 5 years after that fateful night at Restore Paradiso, Kiera Davis Ritchie was sitting on the porch of her winery, her laptop open, reviewing the third quarter numbers. 3 restaurants, a winery, and a thriving nonprofit program that trained low-income youth in the hospitality industry. Not bad for a girl who once dreamed of just making enough money to keep her mother afloat. Mateo appeared, carrying 2 glasses of their finest wine. "You're working again," he said, his voice teasing. "Someone has to keep this empire running," she joked, a smile playing on her lips. "Empire?" He laughed, sitting down beside her and taking her hand in his. "Remember when you thought $60,000 a year was impossible? I remember when $15 an hour seemed like a luxury," she countered, her eyes twinkling. He took her hand and intertwined their fingers, his thumb caressing her skin. The diamond wedding ring gleamed in the warm sunset light, a symbol of their enduring love and commitment. "Do you have any regrets, Kiera?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. She turned to him, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Not one." "And you, Mateo?" Mateo looked at the house where Sophia was watching cartoons with her grandmother, then at the vineyard stretching for miles, and finally at the woman beside him, the woman who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. "My only regret is not taking off that jacket sooner." Kiera laughed, throwing her head back. "Always so dramatic, Mateo." "I learned from the best," he said, pulling her into a tender kiss. "I love you, Kiera." "I love you too, Mateo," she whispered against his lips. They stayed like that as the sun set over Napa Valley, 2 survivors who had found each other against all odds, their love a beacon of hope in a world filled with darkness. She never knelt, and he never asked her to bow. Instead, they stood up together and built an empire based not on fear, but on respect, not on power, but on love. 5 years later, and their story was just beginning. This story of Kiera and Mateo has come to an end. If it touched your heart in any way, leave a like and share it with someone who also enjoys intense and transformative love stories. New emotional stories coming soon. Until next time.